So we are back for another live, my second live today. I hope it's gonna work better than previous time and that you will be able to ask your question on the live. Don't hesitate at the end of the live to ask questions about the previous live I did if you have some unanswered questions. Philippe, if you listen to us, I wish you a quick recovery and that you come back to make some live with us soon. Okay, so today we're gonna look at the mountains scene. So it doesn't have another name for now. It's not really an artwork, but more a R&D project. It's a project I did for my student at Creative Seeds to learn the elevation field terrain in Houdini. So it was also a good opportunity to test the point cloud generation technique that Philippe shown in some of his videos about the Moana Islands. So the point here was to bring a big point cloud in Guerilla and use the object IDs to scatter many objects on the fly, keeping back the information of Houdini. So here is a quick little video I did for this landscape. So it's still work in progress. I guess the lighting is going to change, texturing also a bit. You'll see when I do the breakdown that some of the part of the texturing can be improved yet. So here is for the project. So you have the link in the description if you want to see it without compression. I invite you to take a look at it. So it's not going to be a course about how to build the scene, but more a breakdown like previous time. So there is plenty of very nice workshop online from Side Effects about the 8-field terrain. So if you want to learn more, you can definitely go and check online on their website. And the same for Guerilla. The sessions by Philippe are going to be more explanatory about how to build scenes. So here it's just more breakdown to showcase what you can do with Guerilla and also how you can make interaction between Houdini and Guerilla. So let's start with Houdini. So here is the look of the scene in Houdini for now. So let's just take a look a little bit about the process I followed to build the scene. So 8-field are basically just elevation maps. So I start from a plane, which have a resolution, and I'm gonna start to express different elevation using some noise and some remap functions of Houdini. So here, if you take a look, I just start from a very basic Perlin noise. I can start to draw some masks. So I knew that I wanted to mix in a terrain. I don't know if you've seen it, actually, it's not super readable, but there is a statue here landing on the floor. It starts to be my trademark, kind of. So I wanted to have some elongated lakes figure. So I draw just by hand some long masks like that and use them to remap them with some noise and make some base shape for the mountains. And you'll see that I'm going to work in many passes to just start to build up kind of rough shapes, then progressively detail them. So here at this point it's just very basic massing for the terrain. So I can check from my camera what I'm doing for now. So here it's just mainly starting to put some terrace, can break the procedurality of the terrain. So here is the first erosion. So it's just kind of simulating the years of erosion, of fluvial erosion and thermal erosion on the terrain. So it's a kind of magical node. Even though in Houdini it's quite slow yet, I think for now I prefer to use Gaia or Word Machine erosion for now, but might get better in the future. So here I'm just doing some different kind of remapping, start to add some details. So here it's basically very basic functions of the Houdini 8-field terrains. So here I start to have a first shape for my terrain, still pretty basic. And from the other side, I've took a 3D scan from a 3D scan. So you can go and check 3D scan. I can just show you. They have a lot of free models. It's not actually a dangerous website. You can get on it. And they have a lot of free 3D scan And when you're making some project and just want to experiment some things, they have nice model like that. You don't have to model everything from scratch to just make a R&D test. So here I just took this Saint Hugues, I don't know how to pronounce that in English. So it's just a statue of a religious person with a bird. I found it peaceful, so I thought it could be nice to have him laying down on the ground. So I just make some modification on him, so just position it based on my terrain. So if I just go back on my camera, I just choose a base position for him to be kind of a gigantic statue on the ground. Then I just turn it into a VDB to break some parts and change the position to make more readable profile on his head. I don't know if it's more readable actually, but I preferred the orientation of his head like that. And then I just started to blend in with the terrain. So I did project it on another 8 field and start to blend it with some noise and just to make it a bit more natural. And you can see that from now I'm starting to keep the information of where the statue were in the beginning in order to use it later for the rendering. So here the mask you can see here, I actually store it into a mask called statue, so I can later on use this mask to make some variations in the shader. So you'll see later in Garia how we use that. So here I don't explain node by node, but I'm breaking a bit the statue, making some distortions, just to start to make it a bit more natural looking, so that have been worn out by the weather. And then I start to mix them with the terrain. So here, just to look at this one. So I just blend the two of them. And then I'm gonna put some other erosion on top of that, just to blend them even further. So here you can see that even at this point, I still have an information of where my statue was. It will be useful for the shading. So okay, once I have this, I can start to make some other erosion on top of the two of them. So if you can see here and here, I just start to make some erosion and then make some finer erosion, blend them, and just progressively refining the terrain. So it's always a good idea to start from the rough details and to little by little add some more fine details on it. That way it's easier to go over iterations, and when you want to modify something, you know exactly where to change it without having too much of an effect on the rest of the procedural look of your terrain. I hope it makes sense. So here again, I've just some. I just made a mask for the lakes. So I guess I did made a mask by feature. So I just masked all the parts which were below an area, and I used this mask to remap the terrain. And I also masked the mask before, just to have a part with sharp cliffs and some other with a smoother cliff, just to have some beach at the end. So here, just another remapping to make the center of the lake a bit deeper, and it's what you see at the end is making this kind of variation based on the depth of the water. It's basically this difference of depth in the lakes. So here is another distortion, but I just start to continue to add some more details on the terrain actually. So maybe it would be more interesting for you to look a proper course on the 8 field terrain. Here it's basically just a fast overview of what you can do in Houdini with the 8 field terrains. Okay, some more terrains. And I'm not completely happy yet with the terrain, so the mountains are a bit soft looking, and I was not starting with a proper reference at the beginning, so I just made a detailed looking terrain, but it's not actually very well referenced based on a real landscape. That's why maybe I'm kind of stuck with look for now. Okay, I don't have this cache. Oh, I missed this one. Name, geo. Is it this one? Yes. Okay, so at this point, I'm still with 8 field terrain. So if you look, there is actually no polygon yet. It's just kind of a volume considered by Houdini as a volume. I can export these different channels. So if you middle click, you see that I have different channels here, like statue, sediment, height, debris, water. And I can export them either as point parameters, like when I convert that to mesh, Guerilla is able to read the primary attributes, the primitive attributes directly from the points. But here I just also exported them as maps because I didn't need them later. So here you can see that there is an output map node, and I can just choose to export as they are float channels, 1 channels per component. So here I have RGB alpha, so I can export the aid, sediment, water, and cliff in 1 map, and I just had to use another one for the statue. So it's a pity, but I had just 2 maps like that instead of 5. So okay, so here I output the 8 field terrain, and here I just convert my 8 field terrain from volume to mesh. Then I poly reduce it because it makes quite a few millions of polygons if I just convert it straight away, and I decimate kind of. It's kind of poly reduce. It's like the ZBrush decimation master. And the decimated result of the terrain looks like that. So if I look at the topology, it's pretty ugly, but it preserved the detail we needed to have a lighter terrain in order to move back to Guerilla and start to do some rendering. So at this point, yes, also I found that the face was a bit disrupted by the erosion process and stuff. So I just took some part of the original statue and isolated them in ZBrush, and also I detailed them a little bit, and I decided so to merge them on top of my terrain just to have some more readable parts for the statue. And even though like that, it's not super readable. So and by the way, here I transferred the attributes from the landscape to these new parts, so they have the same water, sediment, cliff attributes than the initial terrain. So Houdini is pretty powerful for that. So I can output like that an ABC of my terrain to export into Guerilla. So here is just for the landscape parts. I'm already 30 minutes in, so let's try to do it a bit faster. Then I need to make the scatter for the vegetations. So here in Houdini you have many tools to define some masks, scatter some points, and have them repelling or avoid each other. It's working pretty well. You can see that here I can scatter some houses on the ground, and I can see that they are repelling each other. And then when I use the trees scatter, I can also say the trees to avoid the houses. So here I just plug a proxy tree to see what I'm doing, but in the end I'm just gonna export some points to Guerilla and make the instancing, final instancing with the high resolution geometries. So here I just move on. So I did some masks based on 8, based on the location, proximity to the water. So you can really make the different kind of procedural rules to decide, okay, in the altitudes I'm gonna take more pines and broadleafs more on the low areas near the water. So here you can see I still have some pines going down, but I have much less broadleaf trees going up. So it can still be refined, but it was working pretty fine for the course. And here I'm scattering the rocks. Again, it's pretty rough for now. I just put some rocks based on the occlusion computed on the terrain. And it looks like that for now. Start to be heavy to display, but here basically we have all the points. So let me break the connection to the instantiated object for now. And I'm going to show you what actually this node created. So the 8-field scatter node is very powerful in Houdini because it stores a lot of attributes on the points and it makes the instantiating process very easy in Guerilla later on. Well, let's break the last one. Okay, so let's take a look at the information we have on the points. So you can see already that all the points have different width on the viewport. It represents actually their p-scale attributes. So each point have an attribute stored on him that says what was the size of the instance we use. So every scatterer here have random radius and things like that, and it's stored actually on the points. So if I take a look at the point attribute I have a tag name, so it's the name of the instancer that generated the point. So I will be able to identify which point is supposed to scatter which kind of object. So here I can see I have my pines, my small rocks, and my houses and broadleafs. And there is a lot of other attributes. So you can see that if they have been generated on a part with sediments, or if they were on a part with a statue. So you can have lots of information like that. You even have the footprint, so you can see if the object is more or less big on the terrain, and you could even make some expression to say that based on the footprint of my point, I will pick one instance or the other. Right? You could do a lot of things based on this information. But we're going to stay pretty basic for now. Yeah. Also, you have an orient attribute expressed as a quaternion, so it's the best way to describe a rotation with the lowest amount of parameters. So let's see how I export the points. So here, when I was working in Houdini, I did make some tests, also some test rendering in Houdini. So I had my instance set up here working in Houdini, but here we'll directly jump to the export part. So what I'm doing here, I take all my points. So let's see. I have the points. Yes, it's just a black background. So I have all my points here, and I'm gonna assign them some attributes to say to Guerilla which object should go on which point. So here I'm just creating an object ID attribute. So it's what Guerilla is asking for to connect an instance with a point. And I say, okay, if the tag attribute on my point is equal to house, assign an object ID attribute to it, and say that the value of this ID attribute is 10 plus floor random $point multiplied by 5. So it means that it's gonna be at least 10, and randomly pick a number between 0 and 4. Because I'm flooring it, so it means that even though I'm using like 4.95, it's gonna be 4. So there is not much chance to have a 5 in with such an expression. So if I look at my geometry spreadsheet and check at my object ID attribute, so let's find it here. Where is object ID? Okay. So you can see that here all the objects which were having the tag houses now have object ID attribute between 10 and 14. So it means that I have 5 different instances of my house. And it's because I've prepared 5 little houses in modeling before. If I had more houses, I could have used more ID range to assign them. So here it's pretty random. It's a random attribution. With more complex rules, we could have said that, okay, if the coverage of the point is below a certain point, put a little house. If it's upper than this p-scale, then use a bigger house. So here you can just push the complexity of that based on your knowledge of Houdini. So here you can see just if I blast all the points but the one with the tag house, I can see that I just get back just my houses. So I do the same process for the broadleafs, pines and small rocks. Then export that. So before the end I just delete all the unnecessary attributes. So here I say delete all the attributes except object ID, orient, p-scale and rand. So if I check back my my attributes now, I just have the position of the points, its orientation, the tag, where is the, okay, no, I got it all in here. So the orientation, the object ID, the p-scale and rand attribute. So here is just, it's basic, but in Garia I want to have this rand attribute to further randomize the shader assignation. You'll see it later what I use it for. But you could have exported more attributes if you want to get them back in Garia. Okay, so here after that I just export my my rope Iambic and I export my points. Also, what else did I do? I have the water here, and actually what I've done with the water is that I took the terrain and I made an attribute transfer from the terrain to the water in order to have a gradient of the distance from the coast. And that way I'm able to blend some noises, some bumped clouds in Garia afterward, and say that okay, maybe the water is a bit quiet or maybe a bit more wavy near the coast, and make some randomness like that on the water. And here I just had some random noise on top of it to say that maybe some areas are maybe affected by wind or stuff like that. Again, it's pretty basic, might be a bit more detailed, but it gives us the control in Garia to make some variation afterward. And for the clouds, I just do a really poor looking cloud. Not very proud of it, but I knew that I wouldn't be passing very far from the camera. So let's take a look at it. I just put 4 different transforms of the same cloud just to position it passing near the camera. So actually here what you are seeing is the low resolution cloud. I have a higher resolution one, but in the end, as you see, we don't see much of the cloud. Actually, it's just a slight haze in front of the camera. So I don't know, maybe if I do a nicer cloud layer, it could be nice, but it's like that for now. And I just exported 4 VDBs that I read back in Garia also. So that's all for Houdini. Let's jump to Garia. Yeah, almost spent 20 minutes on the Houdini. Sorry, mercenaries. Let's open the scene. So I voluntarily closed the scene before to start, just to show you that I'm not putting things in the cache. So here I'm reading the terrain, all the point cloud, and I'm open. So let's close this one just to save a bit of RAM, because my computer is not very powerful here, kind of a laptop. So at the same time, the same thing that the last time. So the performance here are not very representative of Garia, because I have a laptop-like computer. Okay, so let's dive into Garia. So just to mention here, I spoke previous time about the directories and the workspace. You can see that when I'm working on many projects and I just switch from one to the other, I can store all my variables here, and I just change them. Like I put an X in front of it, and it allows me to just decide which variable I want to use today. So a bit root, but works nice, flexible. So now I'm working on the terrain project, so I'm using this workspace. Small detail. Okay, so let's start with Garia. Okay, so you can see that I've just imported all my inputs here. So I have my clouds, my water plane, the terrain, and also my camera. Where is the point cloud? Okay, the point cloud is just hidden, so I have the point cloud also, and the instances are the different objects I'm scattering on the terrain. So I have all my objects, my point cloud, and the things which are visible here are the one I'm gonna render. So let's start. So I always have a base render graph, which I don't use. It's just connecting everyone in the trace sets, the lighting sets, the layer, and had a basic material on everything. We'll take a look at this render graph later, and I have a lighting render graph also. And let's dive into the look dev of the terrain. So first things first, let's start a render. At this point I deactivated almost everything, so we just should have a white terrain with a blue water. Okay, I'm not mistaken. And so for now I just took the water, and let's check a bit the material. It's very basic, and I've done something that I usually don't, is to put a color to the glass color. So here it's just because I wanted to make a trick and to have a color to start right from the beginning, because it's a very large scale. Oh, sorry, is there some question? Okay. Thank you. Voxel FX formation. François, du coup. Yes, so basic color. Normally you don't use color in the glass refraction, but here, as it was a big scale terrain, I wanted to mimic the fact that even though, I mean, even from the first meters, you start to get a tint from the water, and I wanted to have it. So you'll see that actually I merged it after with a volume, but for now it looks a bit shitty. So in the material, you can see that I'm gathering the bump mult attribute, which is actually the attribute I have saved in Houdini. So I've closed here, I can't show you, but when I put this attribute transfer from the coast to the water in Houdini, I stored it to a prim attribute called bump mult. And I'm just using it to remap it and to have a difference in the two bump. Here it's hard to see because it's on a white background, but if you see in the video here, you can see that there is a difference in the frequencies of the noise and the animation of the noise too on the water. Well, it's quite subtle, but makes a bit of variation. And straight away I added a cube, so it's a volume water. It's just a cube which is underwater, and I could have done it with the same plane, but I didn't have a closed geometry, so I just put another cube to make the volume of the water itself. You can see now if I render it, I have some volume in the water. So based on a white background, it seems to be a bit too dark, but you'll see that later it's working quite okay. So here is just a basic volume material to say that the light dies inside of the water, it scatters around. Okay, so I can just play with the density if I want to have a more or less dense water, like that. So it's what's determining the amount of ground we see under the water. So if you see in the video here, you can see sometimes some of the scatter or some of the beach going slowly inside of the water. This can be refined too. Everything can be always refined. Okay, so let's take a look at the shader for the terrain itself. So here it gets a bit more fun. So let's dive inside of the terrain shader to see what I've done. So here I like to do procedural shaders, and with the information we get from the different maps, it's also very pleasing to work with the layered shader in Gaia. You'll see why in a minute. So here I just have two different rock textures, and I blend them with a cloud inside of a ramp. So at this stage I normally just have two different colors for my rocks. So it's just in order to break a little bit the tiling effect of the texture. I use two different kind of tileable texture in order to break it a little bit. But actually the tiling is still too much. Here you don't see it because there is the lighting and there is the bump and stuff like that. But actually the tiling is very bad. Look at that. So I will have to work on that. But I'm closing it a lot with the grass afterwards, so it's why it's not disturbing that much in the end. So here I'm just using a mask of my statue to put a different kind of rock for the statue area. So I'm using the mask of the statue as a driver for another ramp, and I make the repartition. One side it takes the other mix of rock, and here it puts a new rock for the statue itself. So it's just a slight variation of tints, but it brings some richness in the end. And then I use the 8 map to make some sediment kind of effects based on the 8. So here, if I look, I have the 8 map, which I remapped in a 0 to 1 range. So here, if I just switch to albedo, you can see that I have my elevation map from Houdini. Actually, I could have directly used an input position from Guerrilla. I don't know why I used the 8 map. It's a bit stupid. I just could have created like that, use an input node. And here you can use the position in world space, and it's a vector x, y, z. And if I just isolate the y, I could have took the 8 from here. I had the 8 from Houdini, so I use it. So here I just add a cloud to offset the 8. So I just add a random value per point to offset my 8. Then I remapped it with some lines. Again, you'll tell, yeah, it's not a tiger, but I want some lines. This time it's for sediments. So if I look at it, okay, I've started to create some lines over my elevation to break a little bit the repeat of my texture again. And also I wanted to darken a little bit the cliffs, so I use my cliff attribute from Houdini to just darken a little bit the edges also. Again, this one I could have just do a dot product from the normal to a y vector, but I did it like that. Okay, so here I was a bit lazy, so I just used the diffuse as a bump. So because I'm not so near from the terrain, it's not a very big deal actually. So I could have used PBR materials in Megascan or stuff like that. But here I just decided to use the luminance as a bump because I knew that I would scatter a lot of things on top of it, so I didn't want it to go too crazy with the setup, which is already a bit heavy, you'll see, because there is many other layers of textures. And here I just use the possibility in Guerrilla to have a displacement driven in the same slot also. So this was for the larger variations. So I have a bump which is for the smaller variations, and I have another larger one on top of it. So I can, with the material node here, which is very convenient, I can map the displacement and the surface attributes inside of the same shader, which is pretty convenient. So here I've described one shader, and now I'm gonna put the sand on top of it. And the new layered system in Guerrilla is very nice because it's actually just blending the same material on top of it, so it's the same surface shader on top of another surface shader, and it just use a mask to blend the attributes. So here actually I'm just gonna use this layer blend shader to decide where I'm gonna put the new override for the sand. So if I click drag my layer blend shader, you can see where I decided to put the sand, and actually I just use the 8 again, which I've remapped, and oops, I activated no, I didn't activate the node, so it's why I don't have sand for now. So I just use the elevation to decide that below a certain area I would put some sand, and if there were some cliff, I wouldn't put sand. So here, if I just look at the albedo and check if I check my layer blend, here you can see that if I don't multiply my elevation by the cliff, I would have sand a bit more everywhere. So it's a bit hard to notice maybe on this area, but actually I don't have sand on the cliffs. Not very obvious. Okay, so the sand itself is just a very basic triplanar with a displacement as bump. I don't use a real displacement here, it's just to break the normals a little bit. So I just have a diffuse plus displacement and bump. The grass setup is a bit more complex because it's what's filling a big part of the terrain. And let's take a look at it. So here I just separate the mask itself just to show you a bit more visually what I've done. So the grass by itself here, you see again there is a layer blend. So I say the parameter layer is at 3, so it means that rock is at 0, so it's the base layer. Here the parameter is at 2, so it's on top. This one is at 3, it's even more on top. So you can just chain like that many material nodes, and as long as you go on the upper parameters and put the proper blend shader, sorry, you can just stack as much attributes you want to make very complex looking shaders. It's very useful. So let's take a look at the mask for this grass. Well, let's connect it instead of the shader itself. Oops, sorry. Okay, so let's take a look at the mask. So if I get in, you see that I start with 8. So again, I'll just say that based on the elevation, I will want to have less and less grass on the top. But you see it's a bit false because I straight afterward, I take the normal of the terrain, compare it with the y-axis and do a dot product. So what does it does? It compares the normal of the surface with a vector pointing up. So let's just draw it up. So it takes a y vector, compare the normal of the surface to this y vector, and based on the if they are parallel, it's gonna give 1. If they are perpendicular, it's gonna give 0. And if it's pointing the other way, it's gonna be 0 too. So it's just making me actually a kind of snow shader in Maya for the one which are using Maya. So if I just look at the result of that, it's kind of showing me the areas which are pointing up. So I can just blend that, add that on top of the of my elevation. And I first blend it with a cloud just to not put grass everywhere it's pointing up. So I can blend these two stuff. So I have elevation plus upward facing areas. Then I start to remove the cliff, so I just multiply my cliff mask at the next step. Sorry for my English. And so I can remove the cliff from the grass mask. Here I kind of wanted to use the sediment mask to add some grass in the sediment. So where the soft stones have fall down, I wanted to make it a good place to have grass grow. Well, I thought it was nice also to get this information from the erosion to pop up in the picture at the end. All my decisions are not always driven by logic, but also what's looking nice. So then I removed the grass from the beach. And then I also removed the water, so where there is rivers I didn't want it to have grass, so I again use my mask from the water from the erosion pass to remove water, remove the grass from the rivers. Okay, so this is my grass mask, which is a bit more complex than the other ones because it's filling up most of the area. Okay, so let's plug it back and look at the results. So again, it can still be refined. And then I add the water. So water is very simple reflective material. At this distance I didn't do too much tricks to make proper water. I just put some kind of dark blue and some reflections to just catch a few speculars in the render, because I knew that I'm gonna scatter some trees around, stuff like that, so it's not very realistic, but it does the joke, as we say in French. And okay, so this is basically what I've done for the procedural shader of my terrain. But lately I've really noticed that doing such complex procedural shaders is getting quite heavy on the render engine, and it's true in any software. I've made some tests in Redshift 2 and it's really increasing a lot the render time. So I decided to bake the results of all these shaders into one set of textures. So the problem we have with a terrain like that is that I've did some triplanar projection here, and this kind of cliff area, as they are elevation map, they have almost no UVs. So if you check the UVs normally, they are just a planar UVs. I don't know if I set the object right. Up. Let me drag. Sometimes it's a bit hard to refresh this UV view. Can't seem to display the UVs today. Let's see if I just set it like that. Okay. It's not a UV unwrapping problem. So normally the UVs, they are just straight UVs like that, and these parts should be very stretched. So if you want to bake the result of a triplanar projection on an object with flat UVs, normally you can't. So what I've done is that I did some procedural UVs in Houdini. Which I've done actually is I just scattered some points on the ground and did some kind of Voronoi splitting of my UVs. So just to avoid having too much of these small parts. So I still have small parts like that, but I've managed to get the less distortion possible on the map by doing this kind of Voronoi splitting of my UVs and relax them inside of Houdini. I feel like the unwrap is not very powerful yet in Houdini. It makes a lot of strange overlapping if you don't split the terrain enough. So here it's kind of too much fracture to what I like, but I had too much UVs, too much point actually to make a proper UV unwrap at this point. So maybe I could do a retopo of this terrain, do the UV on the proper terrain, then go up and make a decimation master, but okay, it was a bit complex, so I prefer to do it like that at the time. But what I'm gonna show now is that in Guerilla you can easily use procedural shaders and bake them into a different UV set. So with that displayed, I can just show you that here I have a baking shader terrain, so it's a baking render pass. So here if you go into create passes, you can create bake 2D passes. So here you can choose in this pass which UV set you want to bake the information on. Maybe I can also, I don't know, maybe I have to hide the waters to make the bake, not sure. And I'm just gonna show you on a low resolution for now what kind of result it makes. So you can see here that you have AOVs in the layers of Guerilla. So here you see you have all the standard AOVs, but you can also manually override these AOVs to say that you want to take the result of an attribute. So here all my shaders, they are driving the specular roughness, the diffuse color, the normal, the IOR, and I can output that as an AOV to use them as a texture later to plug back into a single shader. So I'm just gonna want to bake what's the essence of my my shader. So for now I just have a very low resolution just to show you. At the end I baked that in 8K, and so you can see here I just have very low resolution to show you what it makes. Up, let's start a render. Okay, so here you can see I can bake small errors. Let's see if it works. You can see I can bake the diffuse result of all my shaders into one texture. And I don't know, in the other rendering engine you can't really easily output, you can output the albedo because it's a known AOV, but you can't output the numeric values of the specular roughness, for example, or some IOR, for example, inside of an AOV. Maybe it's easy to do, but I don't think it's displayed by default on other rendering engine. And tell me if I'm wrong. Maybe in Mantra, just for François. Mantra, I guess, can do that. Okay, so when I did that, I just actually output my textures and plug them back into this material, which is just a very basic material, taking the base output from my shaders. And then maybe, okay, I just did a little bit more bump on top of it later, but I already baked a lot of the complexity of my shader, so I've earned quite a lot of render time actually by doing that. So let's jump on the baked shader. Now I can see that I have more or less the same results, but in much more quick renders. It's hard to see here that it's quicker, but I believe it was like a 3 or 4 hour renders, and it dropped down to like 4 hour to 1 hour or 1.5 hour render. So it really makes a lot of difference to bake your texture instead of using triplaners or various procedural shaders. So let's dive down to the instance part. So here you can see that I have an instancer. So for now, for the one who doesn't know Guerilla, you'll have some more in-depth course about the instance. It's basically a node that can take some point or can take a surface, a scalp, and pop some instances on it. So here my scalp is a point cloud, so I don't have to redefine where the point have to pop. They're gonna pop on the point I give it, and it's gonna use some information I have on the points to orient the points, choose the scale, and even choose which object should be instanced on it. So you can see here that in my scalp I have my point cloud. I just plugged a shader to say that okay, P scale is gonna drive the size of the object. Like if I go in the length attribute, you see that I have a length shader, and it's gonna look at this shader to define what will be the length of the object, the size of the object which will be instanced on this object, on this point. Sorry, and I also have an object ID attribute. So I'm just saying that okay, for the object ID, use the object ID attributes. It's a bit redundant, but it's all you should do to pick which object should go on which point. So here, if you go on the geometry tab, sorry, it's not. So it's on the scalp. I said that the object ID shader is going to be the one to look at to decide which object is going to go on which point. So here I just did a small macro. So if you right click here, you can do what we call a macro, but actually it's the new node. So here it's a macro, it's a new node. You can just dive in it. It's a way to group a bit your render graph and make it look a bit more tidy. So you'll see that inside of this I've put many things. So I have all my instance set up inside of this actually. So here you can see that I have the setup for my broadleaf, the setup for my pines, my house, and my rock. And if I dive in, you'll see what I've done. I've just called all my different instances of broadleaf. So I have 4 instances of broadleaf, A, B, C, and D. So I guess it's just like 3 variations of tree and a dead tree. And I told them that, okay, you are the object ID 20, you are the 21, you are the 22, you are the 23. So I can just revert them if I want to have this tree to pop on the 20 or the 23. I can just decide like that which object is gonna go on which point. Then I just say, okay, all of you just have a bark material for your bark. So I just call all the bark objects from my trees. So all my trees, they all always have the same name actually. So if I go and check the instances, all of them, they have a bark mat and a leaf mat. So it's just what I've exported from speed 3 actually when I generated my object. So all of them, they are named the same way, so they can just take the same shader to drive their bark and their leaves. Well, for this time, the bark is very simple. It's just a plain color actually, because I'm so far, I just didn't bother put a bark texture on this one. Maybe I will later, I don't know. Don't think so. And for the leaf, it's a bit more interesting. I use the prime attribute rand. And actually I specified to my instancer, if I go back here, that it should give the attribute rand, which is picked on the point cloud, and transfer it to the instance. So I can use this attribute on the instance to drive the shader. Sorry if it's too fast, but it's merely to show you what you can expect to do between Houdini and Guerilla. So here I just take this random attribute. So you remember I did generate this random attribute in Guerilla before, in Houdini before the export. And here I just plug that into a gradient. So the random value is between 0 and 1. I say, okay, based on this value, you're gonna pick a different color. So here I say, okay, a very low percentage of the trees are gonna have brown leaves. And all the other ones, they are going to be pretty uniformly spread between these three colors. So based on just one random, you can choose a non-linear random repartition of the color for your leaves, which is pretty powerful. I use it all the time for fur. I use it for trees. I use it for anything I scatter or procedurally generate. I always use this ramp to assign stuff. And here I just multiply the results to put some translucence color on the leaves also. So I could have put a different color for the translucency, but here it's just enough to say, okay, you have 70% of translucence on the leaves. It's gonna work fine. And it's basically what I've done for all the different assets, instead of except for the houses. The house, they have their own a PBR texture set which I've painted in Substance, so they just have one texture to describe their look. I don't even put some roughness or bump on this one, I guess. I don't know why actually. I did do some, but I don't know why I didn't plug them, because we don't see the house at the end, so it's not a big deal. Okay, so here I just did this setup, the same setup for all these elements I want to scatter, and they all go down to the instance slot of my instancer. And when I hit render, it's just gonna instantiate all these objects you see here, and they are gonna find their position on the point cloud. So if I look a bit nearer, you'll see that I have the little house which are here. I have the broadleaf, I have the pines. Maybe I can just switch HD to see a little bit better. So you can see that it didn't took too long to scatter that. And each trees here, they have like, I think 200,000 or 300,000 polygons. And I don't know how many points I have in the scene here, but I think it's pretty dense. So if I just maybe switch to perspective view to show you. Let's make the perspective view the main camera. And let's try to zoom up. Well, up here, okay. The lighting is damp also for now. A bit hard to zoom so near. So you can see that the IPR is also pretty responsive. So you see each of these trees, they have 300,000 polygons. So we are far from the little proxies we had in the Houdini for preview. Up. And you can see that it's pretty responsive in the viewports and in the IPR. The really nice part about Guerilla is that the cache is very strong and it doesn't refresh all the time, so you can really just go and tweak the shaders and don't have to wait to refill the cache. In Redshift, the render was maybe a little bit faster, but the time to cache was slower, and it was renewing the cache so often that I get crazy pretty fast when I work with a big scene like that in Redshift. Okay, let's go back to our camera. Up. Sorry if it's getting a bit long, but hey, if you're interested, if you're still there, it's that you're interested. So, okay, what was the next point I wanted to show? So we've seen that. Bake UVs, instancer. Okay, so as you can see, I didn't put the clouds here yet because I've done another render pass to render the clouds. And in Guerilla, it's very convenient to do the render pass. You just do another render graph and you assign it to another render pass. So here, if I jump to this one, for example, and I can also here jump to the context of this render pass, for example, the cloud foreground. Let's go to this one. Up. Oh, sorry. Let's go to the mid for now. Cloud mid. Okay. I can see what's visible in the context of this render pass, and actually this render graph, so the cloud mid, I can go and see, is just linked to this render pass. So it means that it's going to be affected or active just for this render pass. So as you can see on my previous render graph, the render graph terrain, at the beginning, I just say, okay, take all the objects named cloud and just hide them. So here, if I just look at what's overridden on this node, I see that I just hide all the clouds, but in the context of the terrain only. So in the context of the render pass for the clouds, I said, okay, take everything but the light and the clouds. So I say, okay, now I want to say, I don't want the cloud D, so I remove cloud D from the cloud. So I say all the cloud except cloud D, and the light should be removed from everything. And the result of this operation means that everything except the light and the cloud, but the cloud B, should be hidden. So I'm just hiding everything but the three clouds I want to render in this render pass. And the result of these ones, I just put them a volume shader, and if I render the render pass for the cloud mid, I can see that I have just my cloud in this context. So it's non-destructive, it's very easy to set up, and once it's set up, actually you can really continue to work on any context without being afraid to destruct the other one or to get a weird bug in your scene like you could have with the render layer of Maya, for example. And I did the same for the cloud foreground. Here you can see that this one is just linked to the render pass cloud foreground, and if I render this one, I have just the cloud for my foreground. And you can see that it's refreshing very fast. And in this one, I just say that everything except the cloud D should be hidden under the light also, and assign it a shader, and voila. So it's pretty much it, I guess, for these scenes. Let's see. Yeah, okay. I think I've made the things I wanted to show for this scene. Then I just render the whole things. I believe I was like 1.5 hour render per frame. The samples were not these ones. The samples were Sorry. I guess I was like the usual 10,000 sample and a threshold at 0.03. And I just was pretty light with the diffuse bounce and specular bounce because I'm still kind of testing for now. And as we are on open landscape anyway, after the first bounce of GI, I didn't notice too much difference, so I just optimized a bit like that. But maybe it wouldn't make too much difference. It's a point of view. Okay, so if you have any questions, it might be the time for it. Let's see. I don't have access to the. I'm not looking at the chat. Actually, I might open it now, just to see if there is any questions. Okay. Thank you, François. Yes, Mantra can, of course. Mantra can everything. Really slower than Gary. Yeah, Mantra is a bit outdated, I guess. They're going to replace it now. Street 3000. Question. Why did you use only one instancer for all the scatter and not by different scatters? And what is the resolution texture for your trees or rock, even for the ground you use for this angle of view? Okay, so here I just used one point cloud just to demonstrate the possibility to have just one point cloud and to make a very complex description, but it's true that for that kind of setup I usually prefer to make one point cloud per tip of instance because it's easier to set up, and also I can just deactivate some part of the setup if I want. Here it was just for mainly testing purpose. Okay, I also have the question here. Is it popular? Do you have a workflow to export your vegetation from Houdini to Maya? I don't understand the question exactly. Oh yes, sorry. Maybe I've reopened the... Is it okay for the echo now? I guess it should be okay now. No. So a workflow to export trees from Houdini, not really, because I generate my trees in SpeedTree, and the settings I use is I assign a material for the bark and a material for the leaves, and I say SpeedTree to export separate geometry per materials so I can access them back in Garia. But I don't know if you were exporting geometries from Houdini, you would have, I guess, to use an attribute to regenerate the hierarchy if you want to separate the leaves on the trunk at the export time. If you have a more question on that, you might ask again if I didn't answer your question. Sorry. Apply a mesh, for example. Thanks for your sequence breakdown. Apply a mesh. I didn't understand the mesh question. If you want to apply a mesh, for example, for your sequence breakdown, it's so cool. Ah, sorry, from Houdini to Maya. I didn't read the question well. Well, no, I don't have a workflow for that. Exporting point cloud from Houdini to Maya is is a pain. And I don't think, even if you can export the point cloud, I don't think you can get the information on the points without having a plugin, maybe a Houdini engine kind of thing or something else. So I've tried to make this for a mesh, but didn't manage. Didn't spend too much time either. Any other questions? No? Let's see. About the base. bake texture. Any question about the bake texture? Who can render multiple reading? That's a good question. I never tried actually, but on the bake texture, you can choose the UDIM here. So I guess that you could just, I don't know, maybe send multiple jobs changing these parameters to just bake the multiple UDIMs. Hey, Philippe, you might do a little script for that. I'm not scripting myself, so I would have just sent multiple jobs, I guess, changing these attributes like a poor non-coding graphist. Oh, I don't know if you can send a range. Or maybe we can just animate it. Actually, if I just put a key on that, can I? Yeah, I can animate this. Yeah. I can just put like that. And if it's fine, yes. And I can just send the sequence like that on the farm. I'm stupid. So it's the way to render multiple UD, I guess. Any other questions? Or maybe other ideas what I could do on this picture to make it better, or maybe some questions about last time talk, maybe. No, I don't have the spec. And actually, I didn't even check the specs. Sorry, Philip. I can do that later. But I believe I have like maybe 4 million polygons on the terrain, and I don't know how many trees I have on that. Actually, I can just try. I always forget the. For now, I just have 7 megabytes of RAM eaten by area. It's pretty light. It's pretty light scene actually. Okay, so I see there is some advert for tomorrow, Christophe live. So I will be here also to listen to it. I'm excited to see what he'll have to say to us. So if there is no more question, I think we're gonna end up the live now. And I'm happy that we didn't have a bug this time with the chat. And hope to see you for a next episode, maybe on the procedurals, maybe. So I wish you all a good day and happy confinement. See you all.